Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark, Ellen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyourear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
Welcome to another Word in Your Ear and a new memoir by somebody whose journey through the pop circus, a lot of it in an electric Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow, took in various things. At one moment being a member of Hapsash and the Coloured Coat, the next writing the music for the Wombles. There are enviable highs, there are unsettling lows. We've never read anything like it. It's fantastic. And it's called The Closest Thing to Crazy, and by Mike Batt. Mike, it's lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you, Mark and David.
Great. So we're going to start off. You were in, I think, you were born in Southampton and moved to Winchester soon after. And there's lots about the early records that you bought. Can you remember the first record you bought?
It was The Island of Dreams by the Springfields.
Very good record.
No shame there, surely. Can you remember the first group you saw?
It was either Jimi Hendrix supporting Gina Washington's Ram Jam Band.
Surely you'd remember that.
Yeah, I'd gone to the Apple shop in Baker Street, and I bought myself a silk, would you believe, silk-looking military jacket.
Silk
I was wearing that and watching Jimi Hendrix, who was new on the scene and was only, as I say, supporting Gino Washington and his Ram Jam Band.
There's a great detail where you talk about going to listen to music on jukeboxes, and the record you always chose with your mates was House of the Rising Sun because it was the longest.
It was long, yeah, it was value for money.
Value for money.
It's really, no, absolutely. I would have done the same thing. 4 minutes long, yeah.
It was at least like 4:20 or something.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
you probably know the details, but much better than I do. But yeah, you could snog for a minute longer on.
You could. Fantastic.
When did you first start noticing who wrote the songs as opposed to who sang them? When did you get interested in that side?
Absolutely from the first. John D. Loudermilk was the first.
Oh, yeah.
He was, I thought, hey, what a fantastic name.
Yeah.
And why is it in little brackets below the... why is it in little brackets? And it doesn't even say written by. It just was there, wasn't it? I expected us all to know immediately that that's what it was. And
didn't he write The Language of Love?
I'm afraid I know almost nothing about John D. Loudermilk.
I thought he had a hit with The Language of Love. Anyway,
I don't know whether he did or not. I just know he existed.
You saw his name and thought, what does he do for a living?
Things like Happy Jack by The Who. Songs about strange people who were sort of shunned by society. And even though I lived in a...
Arnold Lane you probably liked then.
Yeah, although I was never a fan really of the band. The Kinks, Trogs, all of those mainstream bands that broke through.
But Dave and I were talking about this yesterday. There's a fascinating period where you were going up. In fact, you answered the ad from Liberty, I think, in the NME, the same way that Bernie Taupin and Elton John applied to. But that world where you went up to Denmark Street when you were a prospective songwriter and with a tape and just knocked on doors. I mean, it did seem to work, didn't it? I mean, you eventually got to see people and got some assessment of your work.
Yeah, I would usually make a phone call first or a letter, and if it was, I'm sorry, can you please send it in? I would say, look, would you make an exception and can I come and see you this time? Because I really don't like sending stuff in. And I don't know who I thought I was. But often they would say, okay. And I'd go and I met Pete Shelley, who was a young A&R man at Decca. And I would walk along I'd go up by train from Winchester where we lived. And I would then walk along the embankment to 9 Albert Embankment, where Decca was, and go and see Pete Shelley. He was the assistant to Dick Rowe,
right,
who obviously is famous for turning down the Beatles and signing the Stones. And so I got friendly with him, and he eventually did a test recording with me, which his bosses rejected, which was fine, fair enough.
Well, you got the job arranging family, didn't you, quite early on? And tell us about, working with them, and also your involvement with Hapsash and the Coloured Coat, because Hapsash and the Coloured Coat are now kind of phenomenally hip. Just from those, crate diggers collect their very rare records, and they're sort of, and you were a member. So tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I went to see Ray Williams, who was ultimately, he was 20 years old as an A&R man. And I describe him in the book as having a sharp suit, a kipper tie, and being, I think the words are something like, he looked like just a 20-year-old, younger, better-looking version of Robert Redford.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, it's sort of like he should have been the pop star, really.
Yeah.
Luckily he couldn't sing, so he was there, and I'm at 20 years old. And I went to see him when I was 18 or 17, actually. So
they were a kind of design collective, weren't they? Graphic designers, and you played piano and kind of eventually joined the group, really.
Yeah, that's right, because they signed me. I don't know whether it was before. Yes, it was before. No, I'd been signed as an artist, and the record company said, "Who produced that B-side?" The head of the record company. Someone said, "Oh, well, Mike produced it himself." And they said, "Right, give him the job of head of A&R." And that was literally it. I was suddenly in this big office. It was being vacated by a senior executive. And it had, Picasso lithographs on the walls, that sort of stuff. It was stupid. It was stupid. If you did a film of it, they'd go, "Oh, no, that couldn't have possibly happened." And Ray had left, not in order to... I had lunch with him a while back, and he corrected me. It wasn't in order to manage Elton, because Elton, as you rightly say, applied to the same advert on the same week that I did. I wonder whether he was sitting in reception. We just didn't know each other. Might have been,
yeah.
And of course, Bernie sent his lyrics in, and Ray put the two of them together.
You were there with Hapsash and the Coloured Coat. I think one of the interesting things about the book, I'm sure Dave will agree with this actually, is you see yourself slightly as an outsider. You talk about the hippies, you're working with family, and there's the smell of patchouli oil, and there's flares and velvet jackets, and you feel a little bit, not threatened by them, but you feel like an outsider. You feel a bit square, is the word I'm trying not to use.
Square is a good word.
Yeah.
I did feel a bit square.
Yeah.
Because I was straight out of school.
Yeah.
In fact, my first visits up to London, and the one I just mentioned with Pete Shelley, and went to see Dick Leahy, who eventually became George Michael's mentor. Those visits were from... I hadn't bunked off school, but I'd finished my A-levels and I was using the time. So I went straight out of school in rural Winchester, and even though we did have hippies and pop culture down there, in order that, that's why I was able to, drive my friends to Southampton to see Jimi Hendrix supporting Gino. It was, I did feel like the new boy in town. But anyway, so I didn't join the hippie culture, as it were, from any angle that would not be normal, like music or, it was music, but I was in town, in London. The first role model I met was a 20-year-old bloke in a suit, and I thought the coolest thing to get for myself to wear, which was only when they signed me as an artist and I had to do a TV show, was a black mohair suit.
Nice.
Because I already saw these, mostly black artists actually, who wore these black tight trousers, mohair suits. So I had one of those. But I didn't wear it to the office. I kept that and wore it on a TV show when I was doing my first single. But I did have, I said to Ray, how can you didn't come from a rich family. How can you dress like you do? You just look great in a suit, and some people do, some people don't. So he said, I've got a credit account at Austin Reed's. You should get one. I'll take you along. And he signed me up. And I got a credit account, £5 a week, to pay to buy clothes. And I had this one suit with a fancy tie and it was light blue and
all that is so much part of the old London that Dave and I can also remember. You take girls out to the Golden Egg,
the Golden
shops.
Egg.
The Golden Egg is so funny. And there's one moment where you're in Savile Row and the Beatles are on the roof. And so describe what happened there, because that's an extraordinary thing. Have you seen Get Back, incidentally, the Peter Jackson?
Yeah, I have.
So all those people interviewed down in the street below, you were among them, weren't you?
I was, and I looked at that thing. I don't remember them making a documentary, but then I wasn't looking for that. I was looking up in the air, looking to see a Beatle. In fact,
were you meant to be on a roof nearby and you couldn't get up there?
Had it been a different day, I would have been with Wayne Bardell, who was he was about our age, but Andrew Lauder, of course, who you would know very well.
Yeah.
Sure. That day that Wayne said it was going to happen, and we were all excited about it being happening. And Wayne didn't make it into the office that day because he was ill. So I didn't have my special person that could take me. His office was actually the entrance to the roof. You had to go through his office to get, it was like in a corridor to get. So we would have had the best view, but Wayne wasn't there. So I just.
So you were on the street and you could hear them though, and you knew it was them.
I was on the street. I could hear it very loud. I looked in that documentary recently to see if I was somehow on camera, but I couldn't find myself. But I stood there and listened and watched. I mean, you could only see the odd head bobbing up and down. But it was fantastic to be there. And I was a Beatles fan, obviously, like everyone else in the world. And it was just an experience one of those experiences, like another couple of experiences, like dancing with ABBA and stuff like that. That you do it at the time, you think, oh, I've just done that. But you don't put it down as one of a great experience that you will one day remember. And even then, we didn't know the Beatles were breaking up. They were just down the road in another record label that was run by friends of ours. And okay, I mean, of course they were the bloody Beatles, so of course we were irreverent. We revered them, but it was another day in the street. But there just happened to be the Beatle concert on the top of
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question about the whole range of your career? You know, that you kind of the Wombles and Katie Melua and all kinds of things throughout your career. One of the things that comes up is you seem to be never afraid of a big deal. You know, never afraid of taking a jump.
Yeah.
Very often with your own money.
Yeah.
which is one of the things I found most interesting about the book. You know, that when you were approached about doing the music for the Wombles, you said, all right, the deal is I get the characters or somebody, I get the character rights, which is obviously a hugely transformational thing. And with Katie Melua, and that was your own label and your own money for TV advertising and all those kinds of things. Were you surrounded by people who say you're crazy?
Well, no, weirdly. First of all, fast forward to Katie Melua. I mean, I'd done well with Vanessa May, and I was doing okay, but that was my last 50,000 quid. I know that sounds a bit crazy. I'm down to my last 50,000 quid. You know, most people go, "Oh wow, I've got 50,000." Yeah. And, well, actually, I did risk it, and I would have gone broke if it hadn't worked. So yes, you're right. I took flying leaps. In fact, the other day I thought of it as this sort of mental image of it. I tend to think in analogies quite often, and the analogy of my life was running through traffic. You know, to get, you know, not waiting for it to stop and walk across the zebra crossing. Just like I want to get to the other side, so I've got traffic. I'm coming through, and that's a bit like the way I've lived my life, I guess. And sometimes I've got knocked over. Right. And sometimes, not usually, but about half and half, you know, I've managed to make it safely to the other side.
But you're not risk averse, are you?
No, I'm a bit risk whatever the other word. What's the word? What's the opposite to
prone? Enthusiastic.
Yeah.
Adjacent.
Right.
The Wombles, Dave was just mentioning that you owned the character rights. That's right, wasn't it? Did you?
Well, I didn't own the underlying character rights of the actual characters. I owned the right to use the characters and make a pop group from them, do anything to do with music. So there were separate music rights and music performance rights that we sort of carved out, and that was what I got as my fee for writing the Wombles song, which eventually became 50 Wombles songs because of 4 albums. And my mum made the costumes, so she, I suppose, injected a design element to it, which we would own, which it would technically own, but it was really the characters were really designed by a bloke called Ivor Wood who'd animated the series. But that's what we did. That was what the deal.
I thought it was interesting that you know, Elizabeth Berriford had written the books, and you were offered the chance to write the music for the TV show, and then it became a huge success. And you were incredibly protective of the whole, if you like, brand of the Wombles. You know, you had these very high standards. You didn't want them to open garden centres. You didn't want them to sell out, actually, is what I'm trying to say. I thought it was quite interesting that somebody who had all that success with the Wombles you'd think you'd just sit back and just milk it for whatever you could get in terms of merchandise and exposure. But you had standards, didn't you?
Well, that's what the people who owned the underlying rights wanted to do. The lady that wrote the book, Elizabeth Beresford, and her company, they were lovely people, actually. But they thought, oh, wow, we've got an opportunity here. Yeah, let's get live Wombles, because they didn't have live Wombles before my mum came along and made me the first Womble. Yeah. Which was only to get the record company's attention, so they had an artist they could promote. Then we suddenly had to be on top of the pot. And we got the phone call, is there a whole band? Because you can't just come on as one Womble. And I said, yes, of course. And it was 2 days away, and they said, you're on top of the pops in 2 days' time. So my mum and dad and my 2 brothers and my sister were all gathered together to make 3 more Womble costumes. And then we were on top of the pops, which is probably a story you haven't got on your list, but there you go. And so, again, because I've rambled off the point, I've forgotten the question you originally asked me.
You were quite protective of the idea of the Wombles. You didn't want them doing too many crass commercial times.
Once they saw these living, breathing Wombles on top of the pops, they thought, right, okay, let's get them all around opening gardening centres and everything. And I said, look, no, because it's like you would never see the Beatles opening a gardening centre, would you? No. And they said, yeah, but you're not the Beatles. I said, no, I know, but sort of it's like that. A band shouldn't do that. So they said, but our characters can.
But we are talking about the Wombles rather than the Beatles. It's quite a different thing, isn't it?
It was on a wholly different level, but it was still the same ethic, which is if you're trying to be a pop group that's got any status at all, you don't put 3 or 4 of them out at the same time wearing 3 or 4 sets of costumes because you'll get sussed. And the other one is that you only let them do things that pop stars would do. And that includes going to open a big new record shop, say, but it wouldn't include opening up going to being hired to go to somebody's party, say, so we had, and they eventually won because they owned the copyright. So they had their own set of Womble costumes. No, we made them. Yeah, my brother ran it for a while. And in the end, I said, look, guys, I don't think we can do this anymore. And now, to this day, they have their own Womble costumes. And, I remember seeing them at the the Jubilee, Queen's Jubilee, on the back of a flatbed truck waving, and they weren't our Wombles. They didn't look like my Wombles. And I thought, you don't look like
hands off my Wombles.
That's a good story.
They weren't my Wombles. They were someone else's Wombles.
Yeah. So can I just go back? One of the chapters that fascinated me most in the book was you're buying a yacht. Your kind of life on the ocean wave, which is a part of Mike Batt I didn't know anything about at all. I mean, you pretty much went around the world, didn't you?
Yeah.
Two and a half years?
We circumcised the world. Well, the whole idea was to get away. I don't know why it was. Excuse me. It was a madness that sort of started to inhabit me. My original idea was to buy either a Winnebago or an old refit an old touring bus, band tourer bus, and drive to India. And I thought that would be it. So it was on that non-grandiose level of just driving to India. I say just driving to India with the secretary and the driver and all that. But nevertheless, having an adventure, there's the point.
But presumably you're in a world where there's a load of other people with big yachts and staff running the yachts, and quite a few of those are fellow pop stars. Would that be right?
No, I never had any friends who had yachts. This is the mad bit. I was having hits. I was in demand. I just finished producing Steel Eye Span, Elkie Brooks. I was in demand. I was having hits. And so why stop? Why break away? It was because of that. It was almost as if, is this it? I've got this lovely house and I've got hit after hit after hit. Is that it? Because it's not going in. I'm just making more hits, and is that going to be my life? And I thought, no, we won't. While I'm young enough to enjoy it, and I've afford it, I bought this yacht. And yes, there is. We discover, dear reader, that there is a grandiose streak running through Mike Batt. It fights this other streak, which is not the non-grandiose streak. Hence, my having the bright blue Rolls-Royce, but also feeling guilty driving it along. And there is no face you can pull as you drive past a bus stop full of people in the rain that doesn't make you look like a prick as you're driving along in a Rolls-Royce. And so there's this kind of like...
I've never experienced this, but I can imagine it's true.
Yeah, I mean, there's no smile you can do. That makes you look smug. If you look serious, it looks like you couldn't give a shit.
You were just talking about producing Steel Eye Span back then. You'd done a lot of production. It really interested me that in the book you're always implying the degree of diplomacy that you need. What sort of things did you used to say to people to try and persuade them out of a bad idea and into a good one? Did you have a lot of stock phrases that you'd say to try and very, very diplomatically tell people you want them to do something different?
That happens with bands when you're in a band. Like the Curse of Pliers was similar. You'd have bands that otherwise would be at each other's throats, but you're there as a sort of traffic cop to say, okay,
traffic cop, very good.
Yeah, that's a good idea. But I tell you what, could we just leave that for a minute and we'll just follow Tim's idea for a minute? If that works better. If it doesn't, we'll do yours. And you're a bit like, it's kind of like the diplomat that loves everyone's ideas, but let's just try his first.
Yes, very good. Yeah, I can imagine.
You can't, because in a band it would be, no, that's a fucking shit idea, we're not doing that. And then they wouldn't speak for 3 days.
Yes, this is it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think your reputation is in the music business? You've been around that music business, British music business, for a long, long time. If they have a kind of thumbnail idea of Mike Batt, what is it?
I spent a lot of effort in that book to try not to sound as if I was whinging about my image, because I do think the Wombles cast a great big shadow over the real me. But then the Wombles, conversely, were the real me, because I enjoyed doing it so much. Getting in a Womble costume, I've got to tell you, it's such thrill, such a fun thing to do. And when we did Glastonbury, I mean, 2011, when we did Glastonbury, albeit many, many years later, it was such a blast. It was fantastic. So in a way, I'm a bit greedy because I like all of these different experiences. I like being all these different people. And it's a strange experience doing something like Glastonbury, because normally you can play Glastonbury and then wander around afterwards and people would recognise you in the crowd as being the person who'd been on the stage. But that clearly didn't happen for you, which is not a rather odd experience. Well, it took me an hour to recover for a start. I was age 61 already, even then, in 2011. So I remember sitting there with my Womble costume around my knees and my mum just giving me bottles of iced water to drink. This is one interesting fact about wearing a Womble costume and working, which I'm sure you didn't need to know, but you don't go for a week because it all goes out through your skin.
Yeah.
Everybody we rehearsed the whole day at Music Bank Studios, and nobody went for a wee once because we were all wearing the costumes and it was all just coming out of our sweat. And so
I shall never think of the Wombles the same way now. Whenever I see someone in a Womble suit.
But to answer your question, what's my image? That's what it is. It is Mr. Womble, and I sort of don't mind it anymore because there's less life, there's less road ahead than there is behind me, and when it was worth worrying about was when I was about 30, probably, which was still 6 years after the Wombles, and that was when it would have been great not to have been Mike Batt the Womble, because then I could have got hired for, I'd written Bright Eyes by then. So that actually gave me a bit of, that sort of got me into the officer's mess of songwriters. I've never thought of it like that, actually. But anyway, and so I did have some credentials where some people thought I was okay. But generally speaking, even to this day, it's like Mike Batt, the Wombles. Oh, yeah, him. And so I'll always have that, and I'll just have to get used to it. And
what are you most proud of?
Was there ever any question of you not of the book not having a picture of you as a Womble on the cover? Was there an interesting discussion with the publisher where you said, I prefer a moody black and white of me?
Yes.
Go on.
Yeah, there was that conversation, and I remember with Pete Selby, who runs the label, and he said to me, "Look, Mike, I think we've either got to have a title that with the word Womble in it, or a picture, one or the other."
Well, you very sensibly agreed with him.
Yeah, it's very sensible to agree with your publisher, actually, as a start. But secondly, and we didn't agree on everything. With things like the edit and stuff, and we'd have, healthy discussions, shall we put it that way. But I actually thought this picture of me looking at the Womble head in a quizzical way, as if I'm saying, and he's even saying it back to me, what are we doing this? Why are we here? And it's kind of like quizzical. And I think it rather tells the story of my relationship with the Wombles, that picture, which is,
which is complicated.
It's a complicated story, and it has actually caused me to have a more interesting life than I would probably had if I did a big rock project, again nearly going bust, just before the Wombles happened. If I'd been as successful as I'd wanted to be with that. If the first idea had worked, you may not be talking to me at all now, but certainly Wombles would never have happened as a pop act because I wouldn't have needed to.
No, sure.
It wouldn't have needed to have happened for me. But I just happened to have this Womble single that I'd made even before.
What's the thing you're proudest of?
What, musically?
Yeah.
Everything in this
Everything
book.
You've done. You've done a huge amount in this book.
Almost arrogant to spend too long thinking about it, as it would imply that there are lots of things I'm proud of. But the bit that doesn't really get that much airtime in my book is the orchestral stuff I've done. And I love working with big orchestras. I love orchestration. I love that whole. I love working with small bands as well. I just love working. It's the social aspect of working with people, but I've done a lot of classical style, filmic work with orchestras and things like caravans, but sadly never to a film that's ever been, apart from Watership Down, ever really made it. So I would love to have done more film scores, to be honest with you. But what am I proudest of? I suppose things that people would know that are well known, like Bright Eyes, for example. I mean, that's one of my calling cards that, say, this is Mike Batt that wrote the Wombles, and people go, yeah, okay. And he wrote Bright Eyes. Oh, really? Let's have a chat,
Yes.
Can I buy you a drink?
Yeah.
So there is that, but when it comes down to what I'm actually proudest of, it might be something you've never heard of, a song I've written.
Yeah. Well, that's the bit about arranging orchestras. There's a bit where you talk about Elkie Brooks, and you're given 3 days, I think, to write all the scores and arrangements for an entire album and record them. And that's a really, really supercharged part of the book. It's extraordinary. It's a fantastic book. Mike, it's lovely to talk to you. It's called The Closest Thing to Crazy, and it's available now. Very nice to see you.